Hey everyone, welcome to the Betsperts Golf Mexico Open DFS preview. I'm Ryan Noonan, excited to be joined by my friend Ron Klos at PGA Splits, the man behind all the data here at Betsperts Golf. What's going on, Ron?
Pretty good. How you doing?
I'm good. I'm excited to talk Mexico. We got a little bit of a unique event again, 2 weeks in a row, right? We had last week with the Zurich with the team event, and now we have a new course, which is different. We had a few of these last couple of years with COVID stuff where we had the concession and we had Palmetto, like some courses that we typically don't see in the rotation. These are always very interesting events here. And we have what feels like a swing season field, other than, of course, John Rahm, who in some circles you consider still the number one golfer in the world. Though obviously Scotty has a fair shake of that. So let's kick it off at the top before we really get into the field, buddy. Let's talk a little bit about the research you've done. I know this is a big part of your research there on the weekends heading into Sunday night, Monday morning, as we kind of flip the calendar every week. This is different. Again, having to find some information to kind of piece together the golfer archetype that we like to kind of target on this week. So I want to get I have some questions on that for you too, but talk to us a little bit about some of the work and some of the research you've done on the course.
Yeah, it's kind of a lull in between majors here. It's either a week you love or you hate. Usually it's a type of week where if you kind of know the lower end players well and you do your research, there's definite edges to be gained. And so, every week's an opportunity, and I think you have to view it that way. So, like you said, there's really no data. There's no course history to draw from. I mean, I was, a lot of people digging deep into satellite photos, trying to get a glimpse of the course. It appears even the players are flying blind this week. Chase Seifert, who's in the field, he told me yesterday that he knows nothing about the course except what he saw on the plane trip, when he flew over, because, the airport's right next to the course. So kind of a learning experience for everybody. It's a par 71 course, measures 74.56 yards. It ranks as the 7th longest course on tour. Kind of a unique track. It has 5 par 3s to go with 4 par 5s and only 9 par 4s. So the par 3s are pretty average in length, but you have 5 of the par 4s over 475 yards, and then you have 3 par 5s over 585 yards. We have wall-to-wall paspalum grass surfaces. And again, not a common grass on the tour, but it's kind of used on these coastal courses. It's known for its stickiness. So drives off the tee, they're not going to roll out as much on the fairways, and they're going to stop much quicker on the greens. Rough is only 1.5 inches. They're trying to increase the green speeds, usually on these kind of tropical coastal courses. Pretty slow greens. Paspalum is naturally slow, but they're trying to get up to about an 11.5 on the Stitt meter, which is pretty average for the tour. So we'll have to see how that plays out. I think it's really important not to forget that this is a resort course, definitely designed for golfers with higher handicaps, not PGA Tour pros. Obviously, they've done a bunch of things to lengthen the course, changed it from a par 73 to a par 71. Coastal winds could be a factor here. Now, looking at the early weather reports, it looks pretty good. I don't even see much wind above 10 miles an hour. But usually, just doing some research on reports, it appears winds almost like clockwork around noon each day tend to increase. So that's another thing to keep an eye on. Definitely, if you're playing showdown lineups, a lot of reports about how much easier it is to play the course in the morning. So that'll be interesting to kind of see as we go along here. So along with the wind, the length, you have 11 holes with water danger, 106 bunkers, numerous large sandy waste areas. And so kind of getting into the actual strokes gained part here. Off the tee, you have very wide fairways, perfect for bombers who love to hit a ton of drivers. You got 5 holes that present water danger off the tee. But looking at the satellite photos, there's really only 2 holes that have water that's really tight to the landing area. So players are going to have a lot of room off the tee. With a lengthy course like this, you're going to have a higher than average amount of approach shots from kind of around 175 plus yards. You're going to have 10 greens that have water in the vicinity on approach. So that might be the toughest part for players. Greg Norman, who designed this course, very typical to how he creates these layouts. Most greens have at least 2 deep bunkers that players will have to deal with. And while the greens are larger than average, second shot accuracy will be crucial. And just kind of wrap it up here. Some course reviews talk about the greens being elevated, and it's really hard to get a good grasp on the actual green complexes. A lot of bunker errors, like we said, so sand saves will take on importance. But one thing for sure, with sticky rough and slower greens, there's kind of less touch involved with chipping and putting. And so, those, whether you're a weak putter or strong putter, it kind of all tends to be neutralized on these types of greens. So tee to green is, I believe, really important this week.
And that's interesting. If there's going to be no wind here, it seems like, again, as you mentioned, a resort style course with big old fairways, not really penal rough. These guys could go at this in a big way if wind is not going to be a problem. So that's going to be interesting to see. I want to remind folks too at the top before we get into the players here, 2 shows a week here on the Betsperts Golf channel. We have the DFS show here, obviously, YouTube and in podcast form, Spotify, Apple. In the morning on Tuesdays, we do the betting show as well. That's already in the books. So subscribe, rate, and review wherever you're watching or listening. We really appreciate that. Busier weeks, better weeks. No offense to the Mexico Open. We'll also do a Wednesday roundtable where we can answer some questions, handle some of your DFS betting, late minute stuff on Wednesdays. Look for that in the coming weeks. So, all right, Ron, at the top, it's really, like I said, it's a swing season type of field. No offense to this field. I mean, they matter. There's FedEx Cup points here that matters. There are paychecks that matter. There are tour cards that matter. A win here is a win here. And really, Jon Rahm is here. Outside of Jon Rahm, it is a kind of a second tier field. A lot of the guys, on the betting board that are priced in the 20s are typically guys that are priced in the 30s or 40s. They high tide raises all ships here. They're kind of just all pushed up outside of Rahm, who is obviously a massive, going to garner some massive ownership, I would expect, on DraftKings because he is such head and shoulders above the field. The problem is, you and I have kind of touched base on this too. Really don't like the 6Ks. So getting up to Rahm kind of forces your hand to take some shots down below. It's a little early. We don't have a ton in the way of early ownership numbers, but it's kind of a yes, no, I think, on Rahm. Are we playing him, jamming him in, and making the rest fit? Again, like we talked about this on the betting show, like there's a lot of narratives that you could tell yourself, like he's going down here to cash a check. He's not, like, this could be a vacation week. Like this guy plays 22, 24 events all year. He has 30 weeks in which he could take a vacation. He is a very wealthy young man. He can go to, Puerto Vallarta whenever he would like. I don't think he would want to plan the vacation around one of his weeks that he's playing golf. Now, again, that could be not true. It just doesn't make sense to me that he's going down there just to cash a check. This isn't a sponsorship thing. This isn't like a home country type of event. Like, I think he's going down there to compete and get a win. He hasn't got a win since the U.S. Open late last year. Rom, what do we do?
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, obviously, I'm not touching those betting odds.
No, same.
But at 11-3, I mean, I was expecting him to be over 12. So I'm locking him in. Kind of what you said. He's not down here for a tune-up. Just knowing his personality, I think he's pissed off that he's dropped a third in the world. So, when you see a guy like Scheffler just dominate the news and these other guys who kind of are going past him slowly, all the chatter about how he's, regressed or whatever, I can see him being very motivated. And so, I kind of go back and forth on it. You kind of see some stats about how, when he plays in weaker fields over the last 2 years, he's played in 5 events. He's got 2 missed cuts. He's got a 14th, a 17th, and a 38th. So it's not like he's taking advantage of the fields. But I don't know. Something just feels different about this. In my opinion, I'm playing him. And, as we kind of get down a little bit lower, I think it's easier because the rest of these guys in this top tier, you've got some win equity with, Kevin Na, Tony Finau, obviously he's, another guy we'll get to here. But once you get below this top tier, like the win equity just drops rapidly. And so to me, I mean, 11-3, I've got to play Jon Rahm, and I'm going to play him a bunch.
Yeah, so let's say he is hypothetically 33%. Let's say he is owned at that rate. It's a jam him in and be overweight type of situation, or you just kind of want to match, or you just want to be a little heavy. Because I get jam him in. I get like just plug him in and build from there. Again, like I'm typically more of a 3 lineup, 3 entry max kind of guy, single entry. So like it's not hard for me to do that on say 3 lineups versus, someone who's getting up into like 20 lineups, or, if a listener is 100, 150 maxing, it's a little bit of a different beast. But what would you advise?
Yeah. So like what I like to do, and I don't know, typically I'll play 100 lineups, sometimes less, maybe this week less, we'll see. But um, definitely go overweight. And when I say lock in, I might put them at 75% this week.
Okay.
I think you have to pick every week. There's going to be 2 or 3 guys that you just love, and they're going to be chalky. But I think, like we've talked before, you just have to eat that chalk, especially if you really love them and are convicted on them. And when you do those things, you just have to be overweight on them to kind of balance that effect. And I think when you get, we talked about, the 6K not being great. I think there are some pretty good viable options in the 7K that you can kind of pair with him. And so, yeah, he's a guy I'll probably at least be double the weight of the field on, whatever that is, if not more.
All right, before we get into like the rest of the top tier, I touched on this at the top, and I kind of want to get your thoughts because I think this is an interesting week, and I think it's a question that has to be answered. And I think people should be trying to answer this intentionally. Is we typically have a course that we know, whether it's, we look back, at the Heritage a couple weeks ago. We have both course history, and we have a golfer archetype that fits there, right? We know the type of golfer that's had success, the skill set there. You need to manage your accuracy off the tee. It's a second shot maker's course. Those types of things matter quite a bit there. And we have that on most PGA Tour weeks. Here, great unknown. We haven't seen this event before. We don't really know about really what's going to work. Are you trying to build a player pool that is kind of highlighting and fitting a certain golfer archetype? Like you talked about length being a thing where we have slow rolling fairways with the Paul's Pollen. They've extended this to a fairly long, I believe you said 7th longest on tour at a par 71. Are we picking golfers that kind of fit that archetype, or are we kind of just finding guys that we like that are in good form that we don't really know? Because I feel like you want to be rewarded when you're right. And if this is a spot that shows up and it's like Detroit, like the 3M, and it's places where like, Bryson, Matt Wolf, and Cam Champ can do well, then like I want to have bombers exclusively basically in my player pool. That helps me cross off some guys. Or maybe it's not. And maybe it ends up being a spot where it's, guys that can just manage and find fairways. We don't know how it's going to play. I think that's the way to go. What do you think?
Yeah. So before I get to like some stats I'm really focusing on as far as kind of that player profile, I think when you get an event like this where there's so many lower level players, I think people are going to try to flock to the names that they do know, that they do recognize. One thing I really like to do in fields like this, where the event is just the strength of field is so weak, is kind of focus on players who have longer term, or I should say, going back in time as far as, long-term form. So I'm even going back 75 rounds, 100 rounds. And when you do that, you kind of see, who's been more consistent over time. And, when you play on these weaker fields, you kind of would expect players who have a little more class, a little more talent to kind of rise to the top. So even a guy like Charles Howell, who's kind of mid-priced here, he's a guy who, long-term, he really pops here. And so that's kind of one thing I'm focusing on is kind of looking back in time a little more instead of just recent form. The one thing I do in my model that I put out each week is a group of stats I call the core 4, which are kind of, in my mind, the 4 most important stats for the week. And so definitely driving distance is one. My strokes gain approach model is the second one. So I'm really focusing on proximity from 175 plus yards in. And then I think comp courses, we're talking, like Puerto Rico, Corrales, even TPC San Antonio, which is another Greg Norman course. I think TPC, or not TPC, but Concession, I think that course fits as well. There's a couple others, but I'm really looking at those. And those, of course, at least half of those have paspalum greens and paspalum grass that have been played on. So kind of looking at that. And then finally, I think another big one here, like you talked about with the scoring, it's probably going to get at least 20 under, maybe even more. Birdie opportunities within 15 feet. I think that's important this week. So putting, I'm really not looking at that at all. Could this get into a putting putting contest, I think it definitely could. But with expected birdie fest, it makes sense to target players who are going to give themselves the best chance to have those birdie chances. And so, like we said, with the putting kind of neutralized more on this surface. So players who can get their approach shots within 15 feet, that's another thing I'm really looking at. So I'm kind of targeting those 4 main areas this week.
That's the thing that worries me with Rahm, to be honest, Ron, because if it's going to be a birdie fest, it's going to be something that is not going to be impacted by wind. You're saying that we're not going to have massive winds. Like, I don't know. I would want Rahm, when he's the class of this field, to be in a spot where it's really going to test his skills that separate him from the bottom of these guys. Like, these guys are all going to be able to go to your local muni and light it up. And if this is going to play like a resort course with no wind, and they can just kind of, grip and rip off the tee, I feel like that kind of brings everyone in a little bit more, especially other bombers, if distance is a thing. And that's my only concern with Rahm. But again, I think he's motivated. I think he is significantly better than anyone else in that top tier. And let's get to those other guys. There are 4 other guys in the 10K range. You mentioned Tony Finau right behind him. Form has been a little bit of a mixed bag of late, but I think it's maybe trending in the right direction. Abe Answer, I think you'll probably be a popular click looking for the Mexico narrative this week. We've had spotty results with Answer of late. Kevin Na, not a spot where, again, if distance is an issue, not a spot where I love Na. And then Patrick Reed, shocking to see him, honestly, at 10K, considering his form of late. Is there anyone else in that is going to be part of your core builds this week?
Yeah, Tony Finau for sure. He's long off the tee, which fits here. I think these wide fairways are going to kind of mitigate his wildness. That's kind of one of the things he's struggled with lately is, just kind of being wide. He's second in approach when I look kind of back at longer term form on approach, which really is going to play here. Obviously his around the green play has been kind of poor recently. But if you remember, the one title he did win in Puerto Rico was on these same greens, Paspalum. So, that's another thing that really has me peaked on him. Answer, I'm not going to touch him here, not with those injury concerns. And, I'm a little worried about rust and, how he's going to kind of look here. I know, you got the whole Mexico narrative, with him. Even going down further, like you said, Kevin Na, like a long course like this just doesn't appeal to me as far as playing him.
Agreed.
And then Patrick Reed, I've got him coming at 4% right now, so that's, do you pivot to him here? The thing that kind of changes my mind on that is he's 113th in the field in driving distance. And so, his distance has been going down lately. And so, I can see maybe doubling the field on him, maybe playing him 10%. He did have a good recent finish on one of these coastal courses. I can't remember exactly which one it was. Might have been Puerto Rico. It's just, there's just not a lot to get excited about with these other 3 guys. And so I can, for the most part, going Rahm and Finau pretty top heavy there.
Yeah, that makes sense. Reed's 100th in ball striking over the last 50 rounds just isn't good enough. Really, all of his results are really kind of propped up by putting results. And if you're telling me we're kind of neutralizing that this week, it's another guy that I want on a tougher track, right? When I think about where he's done well, again, he hasn't done much at all of late. And again, he's probably trending back closer to what we had seen in years past. I do think that the 9s are interesting. Again, this is kind of speaks to the week. A bunch of guys in the 9s that are, typically in the low 8s, high 7s. It kind of drops off a cliff pretty quickly. Gary Woodland feels like he's going to be a very, very popular play this week at 99. Again, just the natural savings. I think that there's a case to be made that you can start a lineup if you're skipping Rahm or Finau with Gary Woodland. Again, checks the boxes from a distance standpoint. Fairly decent in that range you're talking about from 175 to 200. So I like Gary Woodland. Again, we had a couple of T5s there in Florida. Form's been really tremendous outside of a pretty bad putting experience over there in Augusta, but otherwise he's been playing some really good golf. Sebastian Munoz is a guy that, like, in a place like this, if we can get into like the high 20s, like Munoz can get like red hot and absolutely like go crazy here. I'll probably look at see what your first round leader model looks like. I typically like Munoz for those types of plays. It's got an early tee time. Maybe he avoids any of the wind there. Munoz is very interesting to me too. Talk to me about the nines. There's obviously a couple names here that I want to talk about that I haven't mentioned yet, but what jumps out to you here?
Yeah, I think with, when Berger withdrew, that kind of, when we're talking about Woodland, that kind of bumped his ownership up even more.
Yeah.
Prices are just kind of hard to wrap your mind around in this range. When you look at Munoz with a 9.8, it's kind of sticker shock right there. Now, Woodland is probably that second guy along with Rahm that, he's chalky. I've got him at like 24% right now. But him and, I know we're going to have our Aaron Wise discussion coming up, but those are the three guys that I'm playing. I don't care what the chalk is. I'll be at least double, maybe triple the field on those three guys. Woodland just checks every single box this week. When his odds came out, I got him at 30-1. And so 3 top 8s in the last 2 months.
Mm-hmm.
He's fully healthy again. You can clearly see that with his driving distance. He's up to 14th on tour, not just in the field, but on the whole tour, 14th in driving distance.
I think 5th in the field. 14th on tour. It's awesome.
And, he's best. He ranks first in the field in approach for me in my approach model. So, just all those factors. And so I'll look past that 9,900 price this week. Munoz, when you dig deeper on Munoz, I was pretty amazed at some of the numbers. Like when you go back to the last 36 rounds, he's the 3rd best player in this field. Obviously the putting is a little concern, but again, if we're not worried about it, he's been negative putting, 13 of his last 15 events. But yeah, he's been playing really well recently. Cameron Tringale is a guy who definitely, 9% right now. I don't know if that's going to jump at all. But, we've seen so many first-time winners over the last few months. And, he's obviously one of those guys who's never won yet, played for a long time. But he's just so balanced in each area. Off the tee, he can get wild. But, again, this is a course that's going to, mitigate that wildness off the tee. So, I really like him at 9,700. And so kind of before we get, I'm going to let you start with Aaron Wise whenever you're ready for that. But Woodland and Tringale are kind of my 2 in this upper 9 range. I
love Chris Kirk too. I feel like Chris Kirk is a guy that is just steady. There's really no weaknesses in his game. If you look over the last 50 rounds or so, again, the putting is not great, but like he's top 10 in strokes gained around the green, approach, off the tee, obviously ball striking as well. He's just pretty solid, and in this field he becomes one of those guys that makes sense in the 9Ks. Again, you have to kind of divorce yourself of what you think they typically are in a normal full field event. This isn't that, so you have to kind of move on from that. I think he is very much in play. I'm pot committed to Aaron Wise. He's not looking for his first win, but he is looking for that next win as we kind of ascend here. And again, like the form is pretty decent. He's been playing some pretty good golf. If you look again over the last 50 rounds in this field, he's 7th in approach, 7th off the tee. The distance isn't like he's not a bomber, but he is, fair off the tee from a distance standpoint. And then 5th in strokes gained ball striking. So again, it is the putter. I'm hoping maybe there was some gains or there was something learned with a nice putting performance last time out at the RBC Heritage. Kind of, trying to go back to what worked for him in college. Again, I'm definitely from a betting standpoint, I'm locked in on him. I've even been betting him and not playing him very much in DFS, but this week I'm all in.
Yeah, just going back to the putting. So when you look over his last 11 events, he's actually gained putting 7 of them. And so I know he's changed his putting stroke recently. He's had a rough patch there. I know everybody's kind of predicting him. This is kind of the year he's going to blow up. And 8th tee to green. He has the distance. He has a great history on these coastal type courses.
Yep.
And so, he's a guy that, I'm not going to look past this week for sure.
Yep. Cam Champ. I don't know what to do with Cam Champ, Ron, because he is an enigma outside of Augusta National. We mentioned earlier, he did win. He earned his way to Augusta with a win last year in Detroit. But again, very much a similar bomb and gouge type of place. It was weird. He got super hot with the putter in Detroit. Like he gained like almost 10 strokes, I think, on the greens that week. So again, like if there's no penalty to grip it and rip it, there is no one better off the tee than Cam Champ. there's still, I think, a ceiling there that hasn't been realized. It just, if you look at anything recently outside of Augusta, it's pretty uncomfortable to click Cam Champ.
Yeah, totally agree. And people are kind of talking him up even more now. I have him around 13% ownership. I kind of expect that to jump just because the whole distance narrative, I think people are going to really jump on that. But yeah, I mean, 10th at the Masters. I mean, he was actually second in greens and regulation there. Top 5 player here, driving distance. I have Wyndham Clark actually ranked first, so Champ second. You know what? When you think about, okay, well, if his ownership gets up, obviously I'm going to be pivoting to Wise a lot. But when you kind of go below him, to me, I mean, Brendan Todd, Russell Knox, Streelman, I'm not really playing either of those 3 guys here. So another thing, like, he tends to contend out of nowhere at courses like this. He just kind of pops, and I just think where he can kind of rip it off the tee. If he can get any semblance of that approach game like he had at Augusta, I think you definitely have to play him here. It's just a matter of how much you go here. So I do like him this week, but just kind of monitor those ownership numbers as we go.
They could get problematic, to your point, because right around there, like you mentioned, that Todd, Knox, Streelman, Matt Jones. Matt Jones played well last time out, but that's not a great tier here. Again, if you're building into that archetype of golfer, now Feinberg and Andy waxed poetic this morning about Russell Knox. Again, Russell Knox, from an approach standpoint, is going to check a lot of boxes. He can't really putt either, but again, we're knocking that off. But again, the distance is something that's kind of in my way to be able to click Russell Knox.
Yeah, totally agree. He fits more the profile of those, shorter, 7,200 and less courses.
Yep.
So yeah, he's going back to Matt Jones though. I do love him this week. Whether the wind picks up or not, he has a tendency to play good in those types of events. Going back to the Valero, finished second, that very recently, he gained strokes in each category. He was 15th in Riviera, longer course where driving matters. Last 36 holes, he's 5th in the whole field, tee to green. And when you get him on these longer type courses, he's 10th in the field overall. So, of course, his win at Bay Hill last year was on a kind of a similar longer course. So I do like him at 9,000. But yeah, other than that, kind of once we get past Wise and Champ, he's my next guy.
All right, the 8s are going to be your time to sell me on some guys because I'm not super thrilled about any of them. Doug Ghim, I think, is a guy that probably has a little more ceiling than we've seen so far. I don't know really what fits him outside of Sawgrass, and that's always been awfully putting reliant too. We thought maybe we were going to get some ascension from a Sahith Theegala standpoint based on what we saw in Phoenix. Hasn't really come together, but again, the pedigree is definitely there for Theegala, so I can understand why someone would be buying this week in a weaker field event. Aaron Rai is playing some decent golf. Again, distance is kind of a problem here, so he feels kind of like a Russell Knox build than a Cam Champ build, if that makes sense. Carlos Ortiz, possibly again with the Mexico narrative, that feels really lazy to me. His form has been pretty poor of late, unfortunately. And then Davis Riley, again, that we, pretty decent week last week, paired up with Zalatoris. Again, Riley is another guy from a pedigree standpoint that we think is ascending, that should be, if he's going to be that kind of guy, should be able to take advantage and show pretty well in a field like this. So talk to me about the top half of the 8s.
Yeah, so I mean, Doug Ghim, 6th at the Players, he was 35th at the RBC. One thing I really like to look at is, when we talk about missed cuts, obviously that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to get all 6 of your players through that cut line. So one thing I like to do is go back and look at, when players miss cuts, were they still positive tee to green? And so when you go back and look at Doug Ghim, his last 2 missed cuts, he was positive still tee to green. And so even with my core 4 for the week, he's 7th overall in the field over the last 6 months, tee to green. On approach, he's 9th in the field. So again, not a price we typically see for him, but just a very talented guy who, if he can get some putts to fall. So I do like that. my guy down here is probably going to be Aaron Rai. So he is a world-class player. I don't think many people realize that he has 6 international wins like over the past 3 years. We've seen him this year, even on the PGA Tour, which it looks like he's pretty much committed to playing here. He's got 5 top 20s this year. He's positive ball striking. He's 13th tee to green over his last 36 rounds. And he is, if that win picks up, he is a very good win player, just all the experience playing on the European Tour and the like. So Aaron Rai is a guy who I really love at 8,700. Ownership is kind of decent right now, only about 11%. Going down, Carlos Ortiz, like you said, he is a Vidanta Resort ambassador. The thing that does have me a little intrigued on him is he does play good on these longer courses. He's a great par 5 player. And when you look back at his history, he has 3 top 16s playing in Mexico. So we talk about the narrative, but, he has played very well in front of, his home fans. He kind of his last, and this is going back to last year, the last time he really played good was at Mayakoba. He finished 2nd there. So I am intrigued by him, and he's only coming in at, 6% right now. So I think as of now, that's a nice play. And like I said earlier, Charles Howell, I know we're getting down a little bit lower here, but he's a cut maker. He loves these coastal courses. And if you kind of look back when he plays in these weaker field events, he feasts these type of weeks. He's a regular top 20 finisher, and don't need him to win. I don't expect him to win. He may never win again, but top 20, top 15, top 10, he's very capable of pulling that off in a field like this.
You get down here as well. CT Pan feels like a guy that very much is like an Aaron Rai. When you look at their profiles a little bit, it sometimes is a struggle with the putter, maybe a struggle a little bit around the green, but really just from a tee to green standpoint, they could show up pretty well. CT Pan is an interesting guy. We've seen random win equity with CT Pan as well. Another guy too down here. I thought that we were going to be able to get, at least from the betting standpoint, I hadn't looked at DFS pricing yet. I was like, oh, Mark Hubbard. Okay. Like, again, not a distance guy, but the rest of it looks okay. And the form's been pretty decent. Some of it on the Corn Ferry Tour, but and I don't want to say that this is a Corn Ferry event, but like, it's not, again, it's closer to that than it is maybe, what we'll see in a couple of weeks in like Memorial or something. So, shocked that his betting number was in like the 50s. I thought we was going to get like 100 to 1 on a Mark Hubbard outright or something like that. So that will not be on the card, but like Hubbard in DFS, perhaps. He's popped in some spots too over the years where you're not expecting him to show up, and there's a little bit of upside there too. So any interest here in the bottom half of the 8s?
Yeah. So with Hubbard, like if you're just trying to, he's not a guy who's going to win you a GPP or anything, but when you go back in time, he's made 15 of his last 19 cuts. So he's a guy who, you're close to a guarantee. He's going to get you through to the weekend. I do like him here, just going back up. Really the only other guy, Lanto Griffin is somewhat intriguing. His form recently has not been good at 8,300 there. But kind of when you go back in these types of courses, he's 2nd in the field when we have easy scoring courses. He's very consistent off the tee. And kind of my core 4 again, he ranks 12th for me. He's actually 6th in the field in opportunities gained. So he's putting himself in position. He's just not making the putts. And so he's really the only other guy that I am considering. Pan to me, he's just, I worry about his distance on a course like this because he is kind of more of a Harbor Town type player. I will, for the most part, be skipping this kind of lower 8K range and kind of heading into the 7s here.
Agreed. There are 3 guys that I think kind of check the boxes. I think 2 will be very popular, but in that archetype of distance, make a lot of sense. I think Austin Smotherman is going to be very popular down in this range. Makes a lot of sense and is playing better than you think. Actually, really, when you look over the last 50 rounds, he has been pretty terrific, actually. I believe he is, where is the Smotherman? I think he is 4th. 4th in strokes gained ball striking, fourth in approach over the last 50 rounds. It's just kind of wild. Again, distance checks the box there too. Wyndham Clark, as you mentioned, can just absolutely bomb it. Is going to be a fairly popular play. Feinberg mentioned that Mayo is on Wyndham Clark. We do typically see a Mayo bump if it's a guy, especially down here, that he is, touting. You mentioned him being, first in your off the tee model in distance. And then another guy that I don't think is going to be there, that I think at least historically used to kind of check that box and be a guy that we want when it comes down to distance and a little bit of putting, is Patrick Rogers. It hasn't been there of late, but like, it's a guy that I typically like to play in these spots. Again, it hasn't been terrific of late, but you could sell me on Patrick Rogers. So those are kind of my three here in the upper sevens. This is a pretty full range. What do you think?
Yeah, I love this range. Even going to the top at 7,900 with Anirban Lahiri, he's kind of been playing well recently. 4 straight made cuts, finished second at the Players. He's kind of boom or bust on approach. You just kind of don't know what you're going to get from him each week. He does have a good record on Paspalum. Chad Ramey, I think obviously everybody knows he just won Corrales, but when you dig a little deeper, he's got 2 top 5s in the last 6 weeks. He is 5th in birdies or better on these longer type courses. He appears to love these kind of tropical Paspalum setups. He was 17th in Bermuda. He was 5th in Puerto Rico. Yeah. So he's a guy who, people, maybe the whole bias of, he just won, I'm not going to play him again. I think he's a great play here. Yeah, Smotherman, there's not much to dislike about him. I know he really hasn't challenged, any, top of the leaderboard or anything like that. But to me, he's a prime breakout candidate here. I got him at 150 to 1, betting when those odds came out. He's played on the PGA Latino America Tour, so he's got tons of experience playing down here in Mexico on these, same type of courses. Woodland's first in approach. He's actually second on my approach model. And like you said, he's 23rd in driving distance. So, yeah, he checked so many boxes this week. And just going back to Patrick Rogers, I think it's a really kind of good buy low spot for him. I don't think, I've got him at 5% right now. The course suits his skills very, very good. He's long off the tee and he does tend to spray it around, but again, it's not going to hurt him here. He's really good with his long irons. He's 10th in proximity from 200 plus yards. And if this does get into a putting contest, he is one of the best putters in the field. So you kind of have to think about kind of his streakiness here. It's just how weak the field is. This is a perfect event for him to kind of rise to the top. And then, yeah, finally, Wyndham Clark, I'm never hardly ever played him. But, he's trending upwards. He's made 4 straight cuts, leads the field in driving distance. He's 3rd in the field in strokes gained putting. So, again, kind of that driving putting combination. And he does another thing. He has 3 recent top 22 finishes on coastal courses. So just another thing to keep in mind about him.
Yeah, when you look at Patrick Rogers real quick, we had numerous years in a row, basically from 2017 to 2021. He's losing anywhere between a half stroke and like 0.4 strokes per round on approach. This year he is positive 0.02, but again, like he's field average in approach. But if that's per round, like that's 2 per event. Now again, and not always 2 per event because he's not always making the weekend. So sometimes it's 1. But again, that's a massive improvement from a guy that was just kind of hemorrhaging tee to green. So again, like the distance is there. Spraying it's a problem, but spraying it's not going to be a problem here from all accounts. So he's very interesting to me, especially if he's going to be sub 10%, which I think he is going to be based off of some of the other names here. Like I said, he's the same prices as Wyndham Clark. People like playing JT Poston occasionally, like Stallings, Smotherman. Like I think these guys are all going to garner a little bit more ownership. So Patrick Rogers could be an interesting pivot down here. What else in the bottom half? Again, it's a pretty loaded list. Is there anyone else? Because I don't have a ton down here. Peter Uihlein at the bottom is an interesting guy to me at 7K. Again, he's been playing a little bit on the Corn Ferry with some, middling results, can hit the ball pretty far. Again, he fits the archetype, and that's about it.
Yeah, I could go on for a long time about this range, so I'll try to keep it shorter. But And just in general, like this, when you hit this range, this will allow people, and me especially. So if I want to play Rom and Finau together, if I want to play Finau and Woodland, if I want to play Rom and Wise, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take those four guys and I'm going to mix and match just a whole bunch of these guys on here. And so even going up a little higher to 7,500, Nate Lashley, four of his last five events, he's finished in the top 30. He's a coastal course specialist. Alex Smalley, he just finished second at Corrales. He's 7,400. He is, really good with his long irons. He's 20th in driving distance, so he kind of brings that to the table as well. Going down, I really love Grayson Sigg at 7,300. I think he's a really strong play here. Even if he was your last guy into your lineup, he's made 16 of his last 20 cuts. So if you're just looking for a guy down here, just get me through 6 of 6.
Yeah.
7 of his last 8 cuts he's made. So, when you combine that with the weaker field, he's played well in stronger field events than this. Tyler Duncan is a guy who he keeps popping every week in my model. He's very consistent, made 4 of 5 cuts, and his average finish position in those 5 events has been 27th. So, he's kind of been playing much better recently. Chase Seifert. So he's made 4 straight cuts. He grew up in Florida playing on courses similar to this with water danger. And he told me he feels really comfortable on these types of courses. And, he kind of expects to excel on weeks like this. And even going a little bit lower, I think Joseph Bramlett is another guy who,
bomb it.
Just kind of a bombing, but most people don't realize his ball striking as far as approach game is not that bad either. Like I said earlier, kind of with the preview, carry distance off the tee is going to be important here just because the Paspalum kind of stops your ball quicker in the fairway. So you're not going to get as much roll here. And, he's third in the field in carry distance. Long irons, he's 12th in proximity from 200 plus yards. When you look at the comp courses, he's 6th in the field. So to me, he's a perfect course fit here, just, kind of similar to Champ almost, but he's kind of a cheaper version of Cameron Champ. And so I could very easily see him outscoring Champ this week. So Bramlett's a guy who I'm going to be loading up on as well.
Yeah, I like Bramlett. We wanted the Bramlett narrative last week with Matt McNeely with the ice cream, team ice cream, but did not come to fruition, unfortunately. So, all right. How about the 6s? It is not great. There is nothing that jumps out to me as someone that you have to jam in. There are some, varying skill sets that you can mix and match and hope that things go well. If Peter Malnati runs hot with the putter, or Trey Mullinex fits the Bombers, fit an archetype that we're talking about. What do you like in the 6s?
So my strategy down here, and this is typically what it is, but especially when it's this bad down here, is what I'll do is, for some of these, getting into even starting at the top of that range with, an Adam Shank, of Ben Martin, I'll play each of these guys at about 5%, they'll be my last guy in, and I'll kind of spread out the ownership, but probably won't play any even more than 5%. But Shank kind of appeals to me. He has some distance off the tee. He's kind of similar to Patrick Rogers in that, he can get very hot with the putter. I know he made a caddy switch recently, and so he's kind of still getting adjusted to that. But he did just finish 7th at Corrales. So, and then again, same narrative with Ben Martin. We all saw what happened to him when he kind of should have won at Corrales a few weeks ago. He's made 3 straight cuts. He's kind of desperate. If you saw that press conference afterwards, he wants to, get back on tour as a regular. And so, I think that veteran experience that he brings, I think 6,900 is a really good price for him. Once you dip lower, though, Vaughn Taylor, I can't figure out why, but every single week he is like in the top 30 in my model, and then he just doesn't pull through, and I know we've had past bad experiences with him, but he's 6,900. Hayden Buckley's a guy who can rip it off the tee as well. He's 6,800. Vincent Whaley's very intriguing because he has called himself kind of a coastal course specialist, and so I think he's the type of guy who, he's the type of guy who, I'll play some. Once you get below this, though, it's really hard to get excited about any of these guys, especially when if you're strongly considering driving distance being important. There's just so many of these guys, Aaron Baddeley's, and, they're just not guys who can hit it that far off the tee. And so, like you said, you may be able to pick and choose certain skill sets with some of these guys, but yeah, I'm steering clear for the most part.
Yeah, I guess Brandon Hagee at 6,400 is
Yep, good call.
Top 10 in driving distance on tour this season. So that's about it. Again, like, it's so hard because we're trying to find a flavor that fits here at a place that we haven't seen before. But again, like, if that's going to be a massive advantage this week, when you need to get down here, then that makes some sense to me. And that's really about it. It's the only guy down below 65 that I even had on my list that was even worth mentioning. So, all right, my friends, core three guys. I think you've given it to us, but who is going to be kind of the pillars of your lineup construction this week? And again, I know you're going to build more, but if you were kind of building three max, who's going to be at the heart of your lineups?
Yeah, so I'll definitely try to get exposure to at least two of those. When it's Rahm, Fina, Woodland, Aaron Wise. But spreading out even further, like if I'm building a core three, Rahm or Fino, and then Aaron Rai at 8,700. I think he's that's a really good value price. And then even dropping lower, when you get to, like we said, a Smotherman, Rogers, those two guys are really appealing to me as well. And even Bramlett, so
yeah,
I can see a core of like a Rahm, Rai, Bramlett, and kind of building around those three and mixing and matching. I think that's a real good strategy this week.
I love it. I'm going to eat some chalk that I think is going to be there at 9,900 with Gary Woodland. I think that's a good play. I'm on Woodland this weekend. I will have Aaron Wise in that core, of course. And then I'm going to eat the chalk at Smotherman as well at 7,800. I think it just makes too much sense. I think he is, he in this field, based on his skill set, should be a little bit higher. So I think we're getting some value there. I think I'm willing to differentiate elsewhere. I think Patrick Rogers is a guy that you can pivot off of. We can find out. There's a couple guys that you mentioned that you like that weren't on my radar in the eights that I think that I can maybe use to get off of ownership that I think maybe are very much in play too. So, all right, tell the fine folks what is over on Betsperts Golf from you and what's still to come.
Yeah, so betting model, we got articles coming for that. Obviously, first round leader tomorrow. So yeah, it should be interesting with the first round leader. A lot of competition with such a weaker spread out field. So those odds are kind of interesting to look at. So yeah, those are the main two things. And obviously next week, getting back into, Quail Hollow. Well, it's not a Quail Hollow this year, Wells Fargo, it's up in Potomac. So a little different. But yeah, marching onwards towards the PGA Championship here. So can't wait.
Turn the corner. We have some good, better fields and events coming up here. So again, definitely check out betspertsgolf.com, betspertsgolf.com/newsletter. If you want to be able to stay in the loop, free every week, sometimes twice a week. You want to stay up onto any of the promotions, discounts, shows, all the things that we have going on. Andy does a terrific job putting that together. Definitely worth your time. So for Ron, I'm Ryan. We'll see you all next week.